All right, welcome back to another episode of Realty Resilience. I'm your host, Dave Nations, and I'm really excited about our guest today. It's a buddy of mine that I've known for years from Keller Williams, Brian, out of California, Chino Hills, California, to be specific. Brian and I have run into each other multiple times at events throughout the years, and he's always got some cool things going on, always something different, but he's a big thinker and does a lot of good business, and I wanted to bring him on today and have him share his story and what he has going on. Brian, how's it going today?
Real good, real good, real well, David. I trust all is well, man. Sunny Southern California is providing a lot of sun, and we're appreciating it, and we're ready for fall and winter. Yet everything is all good.
What's fall weather like in sunny California?
Man, 75, 70. On a cold, chilly day, it's probably like 60 to 62. So
Sounds perfect.
very, very few days do we get into like the 50s. Usually like 50s in the fall, winter time. It'll be around that November, December, January, some February, 50s, high 40s at night. Typically throughout the day though, it's like 65, 70 during the fall, winter time.
Got it. Well, very cool. It sounds lovely. I need to come visit. So if you wouldn't mind, give the audience a little background on what you were doing before real estate and what got you into real estate.
Yeah, good question. So college before real estate. I'm second generation. Had an opportunity to start learning from my dad in high school. Basically, call it a free internship before I even knew what that was. And then early part of my first couple years of college, helping him out. It's not until recent where we started to combine business. And yet he's retired now. And yet at that time we were separate because, he was in a different market than I was based off of school. So, I wasn't going home to go do business. So I basically took what I learned and sold real estate throughout college. It was one of those things where, when life gives you lemons, you make lemonade type thing. I found myself, this is probably '07, '08. So, you know what was going on around then. I was playing around with commission roles and commission jobs. I was working actually in a loan brokerage where we were doing originations and all of the above. And so like I was on the phones regularly. So that's always been a theme of mine has been I've always been on the phone. So I started out in real estate around telemarketing, even when I was working with my old man. It was just one of those things where the Great Recession hit. And just right before then I said, you know what, the mortgage thing is great. And right around the time when we started to feel it, yeah, I decided to move. Well, my folks and I, we talked, saying, let's move back in because, obviously things are tight. My dad being on the mortgage side at that time, we decided to, put my college stay on hold at that time, living on campus, move back. And so I was working at a authorized dealership selling cell phones. Authorized cell phone dealer, T-Mobile. And so I was one of those guys in the kiosks in the mall. Hey, you need a cell phone? Hey, that BlackBerry looks old. Let's switch you over to whatever. So yeah, I was selling BlackBerries back then. And so one day I had just
Are
been promoted
these?
to it. Yeah, yeah, you still have one. What? That's a keepsake at this moment, right?
Yeah, putting it in the
But
Smithsonian.
yeah, yeah, yeah. The nation's museum. And so, so I was getting ready to work for work one day, and as an assistant manager, putting a tie on. All right, we're gonna have a good day, get some sales. And I had kind of started to work on my real estate licensing, and I had my 3 courses done. I just hadn't taken my exam. And so I get a call from my assistant manager. He says, "Hey, Brian, what are you doing?" And I said, "Hey, I'm getting ready. I'll be in the kiosk in about 30 minutes." And he's like, "Hey, look, don't come back in, don't come into work." I said, "What's going on?" His name was Roy. Roy was like, well, the company just went bankrupt." I'm like, "What does that mean?" So, "Well, you're out of a job." I'm like, "What? How?" "Well, yeah, the company just went bankrupt. Belly up. I don't know what to tell you. Sorry." I said, "Well, what do I do?" He said, "I don't know. I'm out of a job too. Good luck."
Yeah.
It hangs up, man. Then I was like, and I had that kind of overwhelming feeling of, and kind of my life has been around that, peaks and valleys. We call it in Keller Williams, E to P, entrepreneur to purposeful. And so that was when the moment I said, you know what, I'm never going to work for anyone again without, my own personal say so. And so that was the start of me, uh, going on that entrepreneurial journey. So fast forward, got finalized my license and then went back to school and from 21 and a half, selling real estate. And so put myself through the rest of college selling real estate. So in between showings or classes, I'd be at showings and vice versa. And that was it. And so fast forward 2012, graduated and went right in full time in real estate and became rookie of the year for that office that year. 20 I want to say 2013 was that
What was your
rookie of the
degree in,
year.
by the way?
Ties in with the minor of entrepreneurship. So I've always known that I was going to be in some sort of business. And so I said, it was funny. I was in the business calculus classes and all that when I was in finance. And I looked and I'm looking around one day and like everybody's stressed out. Like I remember this feeling. Like we had I think an exam that day and like folks were like bugging out, no conversation. Everybody was like in textbooks and I was like, man, this is stressful. And then I think I had a comm elective or communications elective, and I'm in that class, like the next class over. And I'm looking around, folks are chatting it up, talking, communicating, networking easy, like, just all right, what are you doing after this? Oh, hey, you want to go grab a bite? So I looked at it, I was like, man, it was a two different worlds. The business side, finance, and then the comms. I was like, I think I'm gonna go with the comms. Obviously, my, yeah, personality style fit better, and that's history.
Do you feel like you've used your degree in real estate?
Man, I feel like every day at some sort, some level, obviously the advertising, the marketing, entrepreneurship, so whether it be anything from business planning to, focusing on, a SWOT analysis, right? Strengths, weakness, operation, opportunities and threats, right? We're looking at that in every market, every farm. We're looking at that in how we follow up with leads. So, yeah, by all means, I would say it's probably one of the best areas of concentration that I could have ever even imagined.
So
Or you
your
could be like
first
my sister and get like a biology degree and then and work for a tech company.
Yeah, that's
So
usually what you hear, right? That's usually somebody gets like a religious studies degree and then they're an attorney or something.
yeah,
It's like, oh, okay.
exactly. Yeah.
So then after your first year, your rookie of the year, how much business you do that first year? And what year was that again?
About 20. Yeah, so that would have been about 2013. So my first like full year focused in the business. And so it was about 25 units. My average price point then, this is what, man, yeah, 2013. So it was like 275 to 300. Um, And at that time, I think the average price point for the overall market in the office that I was in was like 550 to six. And so obviously I was selling half of everything. And so it was about 24 to 25 units. And I remember just coming in, every single day. A big part of my life has always been about accountability. And so, I was that guy that, bet my team leader from my office that day or regularly and just saying, hey, look, moving forward Monday through Friday, I'm going to be in the office by 7 a.m. And if I'm not in by 7, I'm gonna pay you at that time, obviously being like just right out of college, I'm like, hey, I'm gonna pay you $5. Every single day that I'm late, even a minute, 7:01, I owe you $5. And that was significant to me because that $5 is whether I was gonna eat lunch or not, right? So $5 footlongs went a long way back in 2013. So, that was my strategy to get that accountability and keep myself on my toes. Because I knew I've always been in sales in some nature. And so I knew, and I was a big basketball guy, in high school and whatnot. I would have played collegiate, and yet, I decided to focus more on real estate throughout college, and obviously the whole recession thing hit. And so, yet I knew the meaning and the importance of accountability, and that was why I said, you know what, hey, I need somebody that I knew that was going to be in the office every single day and asking me about what I did, what time I got in, what time I was leaving, all of the above. And so that team leader was the best person to do that with, and that really helped me grow. I mean, in a bunch of different ways. Just the best thing about real estate is when you treat it like a job, you get paid as frequent as a job, yet you get paid like it's a business and a very lucrative business.
That's awesome. So when you did that with your TL, do you happen to recall how many days you actually had to pay him $5? I mean, I would imagine from what you said, you probably showed up every single day. Maybe there's a
Yeah.
few missing days there.
Oh no, there was days like it'd probably be on average maybe once or twice a week max that I had to come out of that pocket to pay him. In the very beginning, it was like I was more motivated, obviously, so it was like once and maybe twice a week, and then after that, I started closing some deals, so $5 wasn't as much of an issue after the first
And
90
he
days
made
or
you pay
so.
every time?
Oh yeah, every time, every day he would ask me, and I wanted to make it work for me, so I was obviously I told the truth, and here's the $5, here's the $5, and so and it would also, or over time, it started turning into, let me take you to lunch, because it's like, look, all right, Brian, you're doing better now, we got to up the stakes, and so now it was like once a week I was taking him out to lunch, and it turned into a kind of a coaching conversation or relationship, off of that, and it was just something that just even to this day, just the importance of accountability, it created that relationship with accountability for me.
I love that you
I
were
recommend
aware.
everybody do it. Everybody's got to do something like that because otherwise, you're just kind of like you're just on autopilot, and
Well, that's
autopilot in this
interesting,
business is
because I
tough.
think, that early in your career that you knew that about yourself right out of college, that you needed the accountability and you put it in place was really cool. But the other part of that is that's interesting to me is you also don't most people avoid it. And I think a lot of people that are solo agents out there, are avoiding the accountability and or if they're looking to join a team or, grow their business, they have to add in that accountability to push themselves to do something different than they're doing now. And I think most of us are uncomfortable with it and avoid it. You basically looked for it, found it, and attached it to day one, and then that's what made you rookie of the year, that first year because you just had somebody making sure that you were showing up every single day, and that's amazing.
Well, one thing I didn't state was that I only had so much in the bank, so I went all in the real estate. So right after I was done with college, I went right into real estate. So I didn't have a job. There was nothing else. I was already kind of working it a little bit. And yet the last semester, I said, my college career, I was like, all right, 18 units, I'm loading up, I'm focusing on school. Let me just get this thing done. And so I focused on school. And then by the time I was done, I'm like, oh, shoot, I got to build a pipeline. And so literally, I only had 2 months worth of rent in my account. And so I paid, and I could tell you literally day one was June 1st was my first day, because it was like May 20 something is when I walked, I graduated. And so there was about a week's buffer. And then I was like, hey, I want to start June 1st. So June 1st, paid that first month of rent. July, no deals, paid that second month worth of rent. And so come August 1st, I'm like, I'm out of money. I'm working though. I'm paying, these $5 a day every day I'm late. Like I'm stressed out. And so at that moment, I had to literally, it was one of those conversations of betting on yourself. And so I had to borrow some money, frankly, just truthfully. So I made 3 calls. I called an aunt, I called my mom, and then I called my dad. You know, both struck out twice. Actually, my first call to my aunt, she was like, "How about you go get a job?" And I'm like, "I am working," So I'm like, "All right, I'll note it." I've never
Like, I
forgotten
have
that,
a
by the way.
job.
Right, right. I've never forgotten that, by the way, right? And so I talked to my mom. She said, "You know what? Call your dad." I'm like, "Okay." So then I called my dad, and he said, "Look, here it is. You got 1 month. Make it count." And so that was my August. And so literally, I want to say mid-August, like the third week, going into the third week of August, I ended up opening up 3 pendings that week, and then that 3 pendings turned into three in September, three in October, and it just started to roll, and I just kept going. And as a 22-year-old, at that time, three, at a $300,000 price point, let's just say I was taking 2%, you know, 12 to $18,000 in a month, man, that was game changer for me. And so, when I started to see that trickle in, it was like, all right, now I just put myself in a whole nother category amongst the people I was around. So when you start talking about light of best careers out there, I mean, I don't know where else you can start at 21, 22 with some kind of model or process or system and some grit. and crack close to 100K in GCI, your first 6 months in starting a business. I don't know where else you could do that. That's based off, by the way, 2013 or 2012 prices, right? And so when you start looking at that, like where we are today, we start thinking about an amazing career. I mean, real estate just becomes just one of those things where you really look at really tough and say, why don't I become a real estate agent?
Yeah. So on those first 3 deals that you got, where'd they come from? Do you remember?
Bro, I did everything. So it was open houses, it was door knocking, it was cold calls. I'm very, analytical. And so, I built out a system early on that would allow me to post on Craigslist regularly. And really it was nothing but like a sweat equity system. So basically, literally, I geeked out and I put, probably an whole operations manual about what to post every day. Basically, it created a system that we were posting 4 times a day, every day, about 150 posts per day. And that got me about 1,200 unique visitors every single month, about 100 registrations every single month. And that was before I really knew anything about how to really follow up and really focusing on lead follow up and off of online leads. And so I kind of stumbled into it. I just saw a really cool couple videos of like how folks were killing it on Craigslist, and so I just like, all right, I just went into a whole kind of geek mode of just creating a whole process. And then I handed that system over to some siblings I have, right? My brother and my sister who were, at the time. So if I'm 22 at the time, they're probably like 10 and 12. No kidding. I can promise you not. And literally their job every day before they went to school, after they came to school, and then before bed was to post, and they would take turns. And so literally I created a whole system of them, literally copy paste, the titles to the description to the links. And man, that was probably one of the most proudest things that I've ever done in the
What
business
was
is
in it for them?
I paid them, right? And so they were, paid, every couple weeks at the age of 10 and 12. And so I
That's
was
awesome.
paying them, $150 to $200 a month, just posting, 3 to 4, or I would say probably like 100. I gotta keep up with child labor laws, and so it was whatever minimum wage was at that, at that time. No, but no, I definitely, it was probably like come out to be about $100
It doesn't matter, but you
a
paid
week.
them. That's I was just curious how you convinced your brother and sister to help go to work for you, but that
Oh,
was
yeah,
it.
well,
The
definitely
incentive
wasn't
was the
easy,
money.
but you talking about accountability and follow up, and hey, hey, I don't see anything posted so far. Oh, here, mom made me do the dishes. I'll get on it right after the dishes, right? And then so like it's like all those kind of inner workings of working with the family, and
Are they doing real
so
estate
that
now?
no, my sister, she's in tech working for Appfolio, and then my brother, um he's finishing up his computer science major right now, and so we'll see.
Okay.
We'll see.
So
It's still early.
you that was really deep on the first year, which I love. I mean, the accountability that you implement there is impressive. I'll be curious to hear if this sort of travels through your career here. But after the first year, you were rookie of the year. Kind of what happens after that?
Yeah, so you start to go to things. I think a big part of my career, David, obviously I met you through a lot of our leadership roles and time within the in our corporate
I think we
entity.
met at a KWYP event early on, and then I remember
hmm
you jumping in, I believe, as a bold coach at one point.
hmm
And you were a
hmm
TL, I was a TL, so we've like you said, run into each other in a lot of leadership things there.
Well, and that's a lot of the theme is uh plugging in and staying plugged in. And so I had always been at an event, learning, growing. And so, going from, say, rookie of the year to, how do you start to bring on other agents, recruit, admin, continue to grow production, all the obviously has always been about, being a student of the game. And so, being at classes, learning. And then a part of that became teaching what I started to learn and what I started to figure out. And so, I started doing a lot of in Keller Williams, we have a course called Ignite for great agents, brand new agents or agents trying to re-energize themselves. And so or their businesses. And so I used to teach Ignite, a couple sessions here and there. And so I did that for a few years. So I didn't start really team building until I want to say first couple months of 2014, I believe it was. And that's when I really started to say, okay, well, I'm consistently doing, 25 to 30 units. At this time, my price point starting to go up. And so like I'm, 24, 25 doing, quarter mil and above in 13, 14. And so, at that moment, it's like, okay, at that point, I'm juggling. Do I continue to work harder or do I start to work smarter and bring some leverage in? And so I went with leverage, and so I hired my first admin and my first buyer's agent in the truly first 2 weeks, or and within a 2 weeks time period. And for those who've done that, onboard two people in the same time or same moment when you're the person who's leading the business and or training anyone that comes into the business. I went from producer to trainer, and I didn't know that I wasn't keeping the foot on the gas as far as making sure that I'm not just solely focusing on training, that I'm also focusing on production. And so it was a hard time for me because my
How do you
my
balance that?
production. Well, I didn't. So what I know now compared to what I knew then, I didn't know that I would, because every day you're still showing up to work, and if anything, you're working just as hard, if not harder, because now you're focusing on systems, you're focusing on making sure that you're being a better leader, communication, your training. Okay, and none of them were real estate, efficient, right, or fluent. And so I'm teaching about what contracts are, what type of contracts, and so I'm literally going from, day one in real estate to, what I know now. And that really it slowed me down. And so if I were, uh, I've had opportunities to do it over again, I'm only bringing on one person at a time. I'm not onboarding two or three people at a time. It's just too much, particularly if they have no real estate experience. And so, how
How
I
did your
balance
business
that
do
now,
that year when you
I
brought
actually
those two
didn't. It
people on?
didn't. So I actually ended up taking a step back. So I want to say it was at that time, probably my business tanked about 25 to 30% down as a result of focusing on training more so production, which at that time it was important, it was a big deal. However, again, I'm a 23 or so year old young guy with no kids, no, wife, expenses were low. And so I was like, you know what, that all back in anyway. And so fast forward, I had about three iterations of that business, that team, until I was probably on my third or fourth assistant in like 2 or 3 years, probably 2 years. And so I finally found one that clicked for me. At this time, my main buyer's agents, he started to really click, and he was all in. And so I had got him after about a year and a half to a place to where I felt comfortable, where he's like, all right, he's good. And he ended up being the leader of the team. When I became a team leader, I stepped out, and he ended up running the team, in replace of me at that time. And yet, once I got the admin in, that was a key pillar, because it was me, him, and I had two or three different admins rotating in at the time, or rotating out. So had that first one, didn't work out, brought in someone else, didn't hire him well, and then my third one, she was the one that really stuck. I learned from my mistakes. Had a better, comp plan, had a better training plan. And there's one thing I think is really key. It's like, I think folks start to really get themselves, like, start beating themselves up throughout the process when they're like, "Oh, I didn't hire right, and so I'm never going to do this again." And that's a mistake, because I think for me, the most important thing I want to get out of it is that whomever I bring in, whoever I pay and or compensate to be a part of my business, I want them to leave it better than they found it. And so whether it be a system, whether it be checklists, whether it be processes, whether it be marketing, like it's never a bad partnership. It's a partnership that has its time, and once that time or duration runs out, then and again, now I think there's ways to transition people in and out, and or depending on who you are and where you are in that moment, you might not be able to retain an A player if you're a B player. You might not be able to retain a C player if you're a B player, right? You not be able to retain a B player if you're a C player. And so it's one of those things where I had to level up personally as a leader. So, those first couple people may have been great people, but they were probably Bs while I was Cs, while I was a C. And so, with that, that's why at least I was focusing on where can they implement to make my business processes better, to where that the next person who comes in can take it further on, right? And so there's a couple things there that I think are important. It's either knowing the time lapse of that person that you bring in, and don't get in the judgment of yourself if you're not unable to lead that person. You just may not be ready to, right? And so once they transition out, what do you learn? Where do you grow? How do you get better as a better leader? And then the other part is, um, once you find that right person, how are you retaining and keeping them, and overall making sure that your systems are improving along.
So a lot of good things were said there. Around the admin piece, I love how you were looking at it from maybe you weren't the right place at the right time for you personally. I think a lot of people would just chalk it up as, oh, I got the wrong hire. Oh, they weren't any good. But I mean, you had multiple iterations of hiring people. What kept you going? Because there's a lot of people that I have talked to that'll hire somebody and it didn't work and they quit. Not quit the business, but they don't hire anybody. They just, I can't, there's nobody good out there. Nobody can do it better than me. I'm going to keep doing it. And you kept going and kept going and kept going. Right. And I guess like along the way, did you change your approach to what you were looking for? Or did you realize that, like you said, like, hey, I'm hiring this talent and I'm just not there yet and ready to be leading them? A lot of questions there.
I think it was a combination of changing my approach along with also just being higher levels of or perception of how it is to work with somebody. Because you got to think you're like, okay, my first admin was like 55. I was 22, right? 23. And so, there's life things there that I wasn't aware of, whether it be punctuality or just, showing up efficiently, communicating at a higher level. Like she's a grandma. I'm like, I'm a son. You're right. I'm a, you're right. I'm a kid, right? And so when you think about the differences, it's okay, culture wise, how are we working? How are we communicating? So I had to learn about just how to manage and work with people. So the second person I brought on, she was younger. She was more my age, higher levels of energy. And yet I didn't think about the comp plan. I looked at, um, uh, let's just say that I was looking for a Mickey Mouse way or a backdoor way to compensate, which is always a no-no, right? And so, and also she was driving from farther away. So comp plan kind of weak plus further away driving, right? Doesn't add up to longevity. Great individual, great person, and yet I just didn't give enough to make sure she was comfortable to move forward. So that was like a 6 month deal, and then learn from that. And then another 6 months later, I brought in our last one. And so you ask about, what kept me going. It was personal belief. It was understanding the models or going back every time I hit my head up against the ceiling. There's something that I know that I don't know, and so I've got to go back and research what it is that I missed in that go around, so that way I can break through that ceiling again, or for the first time, and then rinse and repeat from there. And so for me, it was learning how to work with people, having better process for onboarding, being better at clarifying who is going to be the best person for me, doing little things like creating a missing persons report. If you've never done a missing persons report, that's a great strategy or tool to use where you can break down, okay, what college education is this person? What personality is this person? What kind of drive does this person have? What might their why be? How are they showing up professionally? All those things that you can literally write down because, otherwise, unless you know exactly what you're looking for, anybody will do. All right. And great, you know, good is great unless you experience great. Then after that, good is no longer good enough. And so, those are one of those things where, you know, my first hire could have been great, because I've never had anybody before. It was great. I have somebody to help me with my paperwork. And then I didn't realize she wasn't doing all these other things. And then so then now I find somebody else. Now she's good. However, because she's better than the last person, I think she's great, right? And then so there's a lot of kind of illusions at times where you think, okay, the people that I have are fantastic until you realize what fantastic is.
How do you determine what fantastic is? That's an interesting point you're bringing up, right? Because you're talking about having somebody. I bring somebody in. I have zero experience. Of course, they're going to be good. It's better than what I had. I had nothing. Right. So I brought somebody in, and in my opinion, because I don't have anything to compare it to, it's amazing. And then that doesn't work out. I bring another one. Now I'm like, well, this is better than that. They're here.
Yeah.
They're not. So how do you
Yeah.
determine that? That's an interesting concept.
I mean, there's this whole adage, inspect what you expect, right? And so, it's that constantly asking that question. So when you do certain things like, um, and I started really picking this up on my third hire, admin hire. And this was the concept of the cash talk, right? KASH. If you've never heard of it, it's a great tool that folks in Keller Williams have used. I think a lot of them have gotten away from it. We don't really talk about it anymore. And yet it was a really good weekly accountability format or discussion format. So the idea is every week you're sitting down with your key hire, admin in this case, and sitting down and you're going over the Cash talk, KASH, knowledge, attitude, skills, and habits. And that dialogue starts to look like, hey, so and so, very appreciate being able to sit with you. It's been a fast week. I may open the conversation with how would you say this last week went? And then, let her or him, share, offload, and then from there, depending on what you pick up, well, let's dive in a little bit on that. So tell me how this last week impacted your knowledge base, right? So what did you learn, and what do you feel you still need to know that might help you be more successful in this role? All right. And then we do the same thing, same question for attitudes. And I like to use attitudes and energy interchangeably. And so tell me how your energy may have been affected this last week. Do you have high energy, low energy? What kind of things do you find gave you energy or took away energy as a result of your role? Right. And what kind of level of energy might you need to have in order for you to be a high performer in this role? All right, let's go to skills, right? So do the same thing with skills, do the same thing with habits. And so I think when you start to hear certain things like, I can't do this, or, I don't know if this is a fit for me, or, and then you start to come out of that meeting with maybe jobs back, where you're starting to take things back, that's where you know it may not be a fantastic hire and or a good fit for you anyway. And so that's where I would start to look at, all right, well, how do we start to transition this person into another role or another team or another brokerage, whatever that looks like.
And this is just another form of accountability. And you're doing this every
Uh,
single week. And
every week.
therefore you're really honing in and making sure that the person you've hired is hitting the mark for you and is the right fit for you. That's impressive. So after a few iterations, you get it right. You got the hire, the admin you're looking for, and you ended up adding in another agent as well, you said, right?
Yeah. So,
And he took
fast
over for you
forward.
when you became a TL.
Yeah. So, we're running at this time, this is called it 2016. We're running the models. We've got, an admin, part-time VA, we've got a couple of agents. And at that time, I want to say we were about 50 to 60 units. At that moment, when you look at where we're at in Southern California, that's about based off of, I want to say, at our average price point at that time about 450 to 5. That would have put us roughly about about 15 million or so. And at that time, you know, I was doing most of the production until I stepped out and focused specifically on running the brokerage, becoming a team leader. So I'm market center leader for our Keller Williams office um, in Orange County at that time. And so when I had an opportunity to do that, the one of the reasons why I said, hey, number one, it was an opportunity for me to learn. That's why, I say, hey, I'm still young. Let me step back out. Let me focus on, what I get to learn from running this bigger business, being a market center. And also, I've got people, right? And fortunately, I have some good folks operationally and sales wise, where I said, I think this could be a good run at learning how I can be a better leader and also empowering folks that I brought in. And so we ended up doing that. And that ran for about after up until about 2018. So it was about a couple years that ran, and as we started to see production slip a bit, I just wasn't involved as much. I wasn't on the day to day, and so I started to see and or experience some culture slip there. Uh, and at the end of 2018 is when I said, I want to go back to the drawing board, and I basically blew up the team. So going into 2019, it was no team, and I focused on a full year of just focusing on market center growth and production through the
So you
market center.
stayed team leader and you just blew up the team and ended that, but stayed in the team leader position in 2019. Okay.
Yeah, Yeah, and then at that time, I that's where I started to transition into because we had some really fair success as the market center team leader. I say we, I, and so I had a pretty good run for about 4 years, and then based off of growth metrics, recruiting metrics, I had an opportunity to become a MAPS coach, and so I became a MAPS Bold coach in 2019. Which is basically a bold coach is a coach that is like a on-site group coach where you're coaching anywhere from 40 to some of our bigger rooms is about 150 to almost 200 agents in one group at a time, once a week for 7 weeks. So
Were
I
you
would
doing that and still team leader?
so actually the first 2019, yes, and then I put in my notice at the end of 2019, and I stopped being a team leader at end of 2019 and focused full time on being a bowl coach for a few years, and then that
How did
transitioned to
bold coaching go? Because it's an in-person one. I've taken it quite a few times. Given your timeline here, is January 2020, you go all in on
yep,
bold coaching, which is an in-person thing, and we all know by March or April, in-person was not a thing.
yep.
You were doing the Zoom thing?
Yeah, so, I did a few sessions where we were in person and then we transitioned to a completely digital. And so I did the digital format. I think we did that up until I want to say about 22. So it was about a year and a half, maybe 2 years that we did I know it's for sure at least 1 year. So it was about a year and a half that we did the full digital experience, and that was interesting. I had only been a part of Bold as a obviously in person um, student, and then also as well as a coach. And one of the biggest things that you can still create experience. It's not going to be the way that it is online in person, and yet you've got to be very intentional about how you do things online to create a better experience. So one thing that I made sure that I did was, I invested in like crazy screens. So, I wanted to be that bold coach to where, like I created my own little mini studio, ton of screens, and I could focus on my material and also still see as many faces that I could on Zoom because at the end of the day, folks are going to interact with you with how they're facially interacting. Is camera on? If the camera's on, great. Are they sitting up? If they're sitting up, I'll create. What are those facial expressions? Are they interacting? How many people are raising their hands? How many people are in the chat? How many people are communicating? And so there's so many different ways. So it just created an opportunity for me to be a better online um, instructor in various ways, which helped us. Funny enough, we had just transitioned in my personal business at this time. Fast forward to end of 2019, I met my now wife. Basically recruited her from another office, brought her in, and it was a coaching relationship initially, and we started really interacting about just what are buyer consultations looking like, what are listing presentations looking like, what are we looking like? How do we do this in the future? And I gave her an interesting strategy where I started seeing, I felt like this was the next logical step, and which was most agents will do, like if you're doing a buyer consultations, thoroughly, you'll probably spend about an hour per client, right? You may spend 30 minutes or so in preparation. So maybe you're 90 minutes in. Now, if you have 2 to 3 buyer consultations a week, now you're talking, you're spending about 5 hours plus, just on buyer consultations or more if you only have 2 to 3 per week. If you anything more than that, it starts to get pretty heavy on top of any showings and whatnot, and then let alone transactions and listings and listing presentations. So we started looking at what could we do to bundle our buyer consultation, and so we started doing all of our consultations online via Zoom. And so we would push everybody into a one group session. This was in the end of 2019, by the way. And so we just started really doing twice a week buyer consultation, group consultation, and we would just funnel people. So whether it be 2 or 3 people, or we'd have 15 people. Our high was like at one point, I think we had like 25, 26 during COVID. And yet that was just a quick way for us to leverage our time and allow other folks see that we're real because we brought other people on, and also that group think where people are able to share questions and
So you
learn
were
about
doing
what other.
group buyer consultations. So you'd have 10, 15 different buyers all on
Yep,
Zoom at the same time, and you're just
yep.
going through your presentation that you would normally do. with one buyer, but instead 10, let's say, and then they say, okay, and then when you're closed, as you send them the buyer agreement and all the stuff they need to sign, and so if you did a group, let's say it's 10 people on a call, how many would agree to work with you at that point? All 10?
Well, when you do because we every Zoom that we did a survey in Zoom. You have the ability to put up a poll. It was a poll, and so we would put up a poll, and we would say, number one, um, when's the next time you're looking to purchase, right? And so we'd be, or are you in the market now? 0 to 60 days. Basically, we'd rank it A buyer, B buyer, C buyer, C right, D, based off timelines. And so, from there, we'd say, are you working with an agent? Yes, no, not really. And then number three, would you like us to reach out to you about, what we could do to help you? And so those would be like 3 to 4 questions that we would ask. And so every Zoom we would leave with basically knowing who to follow up with. So if for every 10 people who would jump on, eight would say, yeah, I'm interested. About one or two would be like, I'm looking now. And the other, say, three or so, four would be like, I'm, 3 to 9 months out.
So,
And
but it was a good
so
lead generator. Very, very
it was an
cool.
amazing lead generator, and so that was just the start. And then from there, based off what I learned through, everything we were doing and the bold and whatnot, then we just started really kicking it up with, cooking with gas and doing more of it. And it just became a whole process to where we started doing pre-recorded webinars, and we would just send people there individually or group, whatever, and each person can watch their own pre-recorded webinar, but it looks real and it's a timed chat. And so like the chat makes it look and feel real because it's a pre-recorded webinar and they're interacting with it. So it's funny. I had my cousin, she bought a house from us a few years ago. We were doing this system. And so we had her go through it. She had no idea. So we sent her the link. She jumped in. It's pre-recorded. And in the very 2 minutes by kind of just accident, and we ended up just keeping it. I'm saying something and my wife is on and she's in another computer doing this thing, and I say, hey, can you hear me? Hey, we can't hear you. We can't hear you. But it was me. I had my audio down, but she was fine. And so people in the chat would say, oh, I hear you just fine. You're okay. Right. And so these are people who were going in, had no idea that it was pre-recorded. So like those little things show you that people are engaged, paying attention, and just
It's
how
a funny
how
accident that actually made it look real, even though it wasn't, right?
exactly. So for those of you like who are interested in like what program I used, Webinar Jam and Ever Webinar. So webinar is what you use to record it live, and then Ever Webinar is like the evergreen part of it to where it plays that same webinar over and over and over and over again. So, David, I may talk to you today, and you're like, hey, I'm interested in buying a home. And I'm like, hey, sounds great, David. One of the things that we find important is that we know that our most successful clients are our most educated clients. That's why we give you a lot of information up front to help you make better decisions down the line. I mean, you could see that how that's fair, right? Yeah, I can see that. All right, perfect. Well, we do actually a consultation regularly, and you have actually the option of watching it live or pre-recorded. And I'm going to send you this link, and you can choose whichever one works best for you based off your schedule. Could we agree that you're going to watch that before we go through the rest of the process? Because I've right and yeah, perfect, great. They watch it and we follow up on that. Hey, did you get a chance to join? Did you get a chance to join? Did you watch? Did you watch? I mean, for us, it's about it really weeded out who was real serious and who was not. Right now, luxury, we'll one off and say, okay, well, 'cause like I had a high school friend or college friend of mine, and he ended up buying a $1.2 million house from us. And he's the kind of guy like, do I have to really sit through it? Can we just talk about it? And I'm like, all right, let's jump on. And I gave him kind of like a quick, version of a consultation. And yet, for the most people, I would say 80% watch it. They don't even watch it, always watch it on their time or your time. They'll watch it on their time, and that's where they'll follow up. Hey, check it in. Did you watch it? Did you watch it? Did you watch it?
That's wild. So let's fast forward. You're like to now. Where's the team at, and what kind of business are you doing now?
Yeah. So this was as of we're in 25 now. So as of 24, I had some life things happen, right? So I ended up buying into a brokerage. I was an operating principal for a brokerage. We had a couple hundred agents. It was still bold coaching. I was a one-on-one coach at one point. So there was a bunch of things that we were doing, and so had some life things happen. Some loss, some personal issues, health, right? And so I started really thinking about, what's the next iteration of the business. And I've always been a fan of doing things that I only enjoy and, keeping it simple and focused. But I had gotten away from that over years,
I was
right?
gonna
And
say
so
you're
one
the farthest thing from simple, doing
right.
20 things at one time.
Man, and so I think if you're not careful, and then for those who are listening, I trust that my story is one of those stories where you're reminded to, number one, get back to what you love, get back to your strengths, and get back to simplicity, because the more complicated that we make things, and by the way, our industry is great at making it complicated, whether it be on the brokerage level, whether it be at the agent level, whether it be just as a professional in general. Our income comes from the amount of people that we talk to regularly about real estate and how well we follow up and the quality of service that we bring. Those are the three key things. After that, everything else is complexity. And so I got into high levels of complexity, which I found that I kind of fell out of love with the business. And so basically just blew it up, man. So I sold the brokerage, they took my interest back, dropped out of coaching at all angles. I don't even coach. I was doing some side coaching for a little bit. I don't even coach anyone. Like, if I'm coaching you, you're a part of the team now, and that's it, right? Let's be in better alignment, better upside. And so today it's my wife and I. We've got a couple VAs and a couple junior agents locally, and yet most of our people that, like, for areas I was telling you before the call, we service up to about 35 to 40 miles outside of our where we personally live. And though most of the way that that's possible, particularly with our buyers, have the ability to partner with a bunch of great showing agents. But a lot of the showing agents that we work with aren't on our team personally. We just call it subcontract. We'll call the market center or a brokerage nearby that's, same affiliation. We'll reach out and connect with them and just say, hey, we're looking for somebody who's up and coming, somebody you feel is responsible. That would be a great fit for us just to partner with on this transaction, help us open some doors. And depending on who that person is, the client and who that person is, we'll either pay them a percentage of the deal, or we'll just flat fee per door, call it a day, based off of who that client is. And that's been working out great for us, man. We've been running that model since 2020, mid 2020, man. Mid
Well,
2020, that
so it's
model's been
great
working
because
great for us.
there's no limits for you.
No, no,
I mean, while you said you have a 30 to 40-mile radius, technically you could go further out if you wanted to. You just got to find
I
the
want
right
to.
showing partner, and if you had the
Yeah,
leads for it. So I love
yeah.
that, because if anyone that's listening to this can think bigger, right? I'm in St. Louis. I don't have to just sell in St. Louis. I could sell in Columbia or Springfield or other areas that are outside of St. Louis if I find the right people. And of course, if I have the business. But if you really wanted to grow it, you could grow without having to go out and go find people and put them on your team. So that's really that's very cool.
It comes out to be like a good screening interview, or a good ability for us to get to know the people first before we really become committed and doing all the other things, and an obligation that comes with being a rainmaker for them. So whether it be training and all that. So, I dig it. It's probably been one of the best things that we've done with the business, um, which is really partnering with our showing partners. So today, we'll wrap up this year a little bit under. I'm stretching. My stretch right now is 26, 27 million. Right now we're tracking for about 21, 22. So, that's basically where we're at. Now, it's been a down year for us in terms of um, being and being in my environment. So, I look back and I said, okay, man, this has been a transition year for us. Still being, able to close out our 21, 22 million closing pended. And more importantly, being closer to my kid, my wife, working from home. By the way, I can't stand working from home, and yet I love it at the same time. And so we're in that process. We're moving our office and the construction and all of that. And so I've been working from home for the majority of this year. And, I look forward. One of the things I'm most excited about is getting back into our environment, building our environment. Right now, we should be done on construction, where we'll have our satellite office done here in the next month, and we're just going to blow it up. And so one of the reasons why we're partnered with Place is, we have an opportunity to, use some of the best tech out there, some of the best training, best network to offer more services and better support to the agents that we're going to actually bring on to our personal business. And so next year, the focus is that we'll wrap up 2026, just started getting my business planning together. We have team production 70 million, personal production 40 million is the goal. So hold us to
Well,
it.
well, you have had an amazing journey. You've done all kinds of stuff, which is why I wanted to bring you on here. I think you can be an amazing mentor for a lot of people with your experience and what you've gone through, and just the accountability you put in for yourself. And um, you're I don't know, the way you think is different than a lot of agents that I talk to, which is why I really wanted to interview you and highlight your success. So congrats on everything. Before we wrap up, I love to ask my last question on every episode is, what's the funniest thing that's happened to you in real estate? Or if you want, what's the strangest thing that's happened to you? Either one, whichever question you'd like to answer. But I always love to hear a good story to wrap up our episode.
Man, there's just real estate, there's just so many little quirks and just random things that happen in the business. And, you know, I would probably well, I would say probably one of the more stressful events where, we had a gentleman, and it was weird, but it was also stressful mostly. And it was one of my first transactions where I'm calling, like it's one of those things where I'm on the phone every day, and so it ended up being a for sale by owner. And so it was in a market too that doesn't always turn over, so like it was one of those like listings where you take when you're like, this is good as sold, and yet it was good as sold, and yet we just didn't take into account, like, he was a elderly gentleman with like a caregiver, two kids. He was falling out with his kids, but they were in the picture, but they weren't. And they're like, yeah, sure, help him out, but we don't want anything to do with the process. And so, come to find out, we're like halfway through the deal, the transaction, getting ready to close, and we didn't realize, like, the whole story was he was gonna live with one of his kids, and then the kid come back and says he's not living with me. And we're like, okay, so what do you mean? Where's he gonna live? And they're like, I don't know. That's up to him. And so we're like, okay, well, and the guy had to have been like 75 years old. And so now we're like 2 weeks left in close. This gentleman has nowhere else to go. We sold his house already. And so it was one of those things where it was me, my admin, and we ended up double ending it. So the buyer's agent was involved. He ended up getting the buyer in. And it was like all hands on deck to help this guy move, get this. So we ended up finding him he had decided to go to a mobile or manufactured home, which was everything that he was looking for. Yet it was like everybody was moving. And I ended up having to get the guy like a hotel room for like 2 days, because I was like, I don't want him homeless or anything like that. So we got him like a hotel room for 2 days while we're arranging the moving truck and getting all that stuff. And so it was just one of those things where, I'm sitting here, I'm like 20, I guess 5 at the moment. I'm like, this is super stressful. And it's one of those checks. It was a good check. Yet you look at the check and you're like, dang, is this all I've earned? Right? Because it's like, dang, you went through all that and you're stressing every night. You're not sleeping because you're like, man, I got to make sure this guy's not homeless. And you do all of that and you're like, oh my God. And so, one thing I always double check now, that was one of those things where, like, hidden gems early on, it's like, okay, what's your plan for where you're going next? And are you sure about that? And if it has anybody else
Good
in
lesson learned, right? You gotta
part of
ask
that,
that up front. Now you know before you get too far in. Yeah.
yeah, it was just one of those things where I'm like sitting there, I'm like, oh my God. So I'm glad that we got it done for him. Good guy, really good past client. Sent us 3 referrals. We've closed 2. Just a good guy. And so, um, yeah,
Well,
Mr.
how
Jerry.
can people find you if they wanna pick your brain some more, if they've got referrals for you, anything? How does someone find you?
Yeah, easiest way. I mean, you can find me on social media at Brian E. Res Wealthy Team, Instagram, at Brian E. with an I, Res Wealthy Team on Instagram. Shoot me a direct message. I check those very quick, frequently, and any questions I can offer, happy to help.
Well, hey, man, I appreciate you being on today. This was awesome. You had a ton of good information. I'm excited for this to come out and for everyone to hear how great of a story you've got and how successful you've been. So thanks for being on today.
My pleasure, Mr. Nations Network.
That's right,
Yeah, I
man.
don't know if
Well,
I don't know
thanks
if it gets
again
a
For everyone out there listening, appreciate you following us at Realty Resilience, and stay tuned for another great episode coming up. Thanks. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Realty Resilience. Be sure to join our free Realty Resilience Facebook group where real estate professionals connect, share strategies, and access resources. You can also follow us on Instagram, like us on Facebook, or subscribe to our YouTube channel for more insights. And remember, we release new episodes every 2 weeks. See you next time.